Hey gang, and welcome to the preview of Desert Bloom, the Naya Precon from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. As always, thanks to Wizards of the Coast for sending me this free preview deck, and let's get into some exciting new cards. First up, you've probably already seen them, but Abraded Bluffs, Bristling Backwoods, and Creosote Heath are all brand new common lands. This is the new cycle introduced in Thunder Junction, and they're basically draft fixing with some upside, as they ping an opponent for 1 as they come in. They've also got the desert land type, which I think is pretty cool, and something that likely will be surprisingly relevant for this deck as we move forward with it. Next up is Cactus Preserve. This is a fun reflecting pool variant, albeit slower. I'm assuming it comes into play tapped because of the activated ability, which is okay. Assuming you're playing this in the Precon, you get to pay 3 colorless mana for an 8/8 with reach, which is nice, and it's also got that desert land type to boot. Unfortunately, I don't know how important it is that it comes into play tapped, since you can't even swing with it and it doesn't have haste. Next up is Conduit pylons, and I love the art on this land. The blue is super vibrant, and I can only imagine how cool it'll look in foil. As a land, it's okay, it filters. It taps for a colorless as well, and surveils 1 as it enters untapped, which isn't something to overlook. Plus, once again, it's got desert slapped onto it, so it works really well in this deck. We've also got a Mirage Mesa, which comes in tapped, and you get to pick a color. It's not bad, it's not terribly exciting, it's decent fixing, and once again, it's a desert. Now, getting into the meat of the deck and some of the brand new cards, we've got Angel of Indemnity. I like this card a lot. I've been a huge fan of Karmic Guide my entire time playing Commander, and this feels very similar to that, but with a few key differences and some definite upside. Firstly, it can bring back more than just creatures, although you are restricted to it, costing 4 less. This means you can bring back lands though, which is pretty sweet, enchantments, whatever you want. It also has Encore, which is one of my absolute favorite mechanics, which I'm kind of biased about since I love anything that can make a creature token for Tristani. The Encore costs only a white and a colorless more to bring back potentially 3 permanents, which just seems wild to me. Plus you'll then get to attack with them since they're hasty 5/5s, and you've got yourself a really winner of a card. Bovine Intervention has already been spoiled by this point, but it's solid removal. It's more restrictive than Generous Gift, but also costs a whole colorless less. I can definitely see myself playing with this, even with the restrictions of only artifacts or creatures. We've also got a brand new board wipe in the deck with Cataclysmic Prospecting. It continues the trend we've been seeing of making treasures, but ones that come in tapped. I'm guessing this is to slow down some explosive turns that have happened with cards like Dockside Distortionist, and I'm pretty okay with this. As a wipe, it's solid, you have to pay a lot of mana into it if you got a bunch of big creatures on the board, but the upside is, assuming you play deserts, is a lot. I'd say even getting 1 or 2 treasures would make it worthwhile to run at least a few desert lands in your red deck. I already run Scavenger Grounds, which is a desert, so it wouldn't be that hard to add another one. I'm not sure what it is about green, but some of my favorite creatures in the color are at the 3 mana value slot. You've got Ramming Up Excavator, Realmwalker, and now we have Dune Chanter. Not only does this provide multicolored decks with fixing since it gives all of our lands tap for any color, but it also turns lands on the field, and those that aren't, into deserts. This would be massive with Cataclysmic Prospecting, and it's just a fun ability anyway. But that isn't it though, it even has an activated ability, milling us for 2, and you gain life for each land that you hit. This seems like an incredible card for only 3 mana, and one that I'm hoping to tutor for with Green Sun Zenith often. Embrace the Unknown immediately made me think of Galvanic Relay, which is my way of saying I've probably been playing too much Legacy recently. It seems like a great card, and although it isn't as strong as Relay since Storm is busted, it definitely has a lot of upside. You get 2 cards instead of 1, which is just great, and being able to keep casting it from your graveyard is very powerful. It can turn those late game dead draw lands into potential action, and at only 3 mana, I can definitely see myself playing this card. The other legendary creature for this deck is Kiri, Talented Sprout, and I've only seen this card for a few days, but I get it, he is so dang cute. We also get a non-Abzan 3-color Treefolk commander, which I think is great. I love variety, and it has a very different ability than what I've come to expect from Treefolk-based commanders. It has a static power pump for only Treefolk and plants, which is a bit odd considering they tend to be more focused on toughness. Its second ability is also interesting in that it goes off after combat. I guess so that you can bring back a Treefolk or a plant. Either way, for 4 mana, he seems great. Map the Frontiers made me immediately think of Skyshroud Claim, but the more I think about it and let it sink in, its comparison is probably closer to Secretus Roots. The lands you find come in tapped, and although you get to find more than just basics, I feel like your deck really needs to care about deserts to justify this one, just like Circuitous Routes wants to care about gates. Requisition Raid is a spree card, and I love spree cards. I think the rare versions are incredible, and I'm always happy to play a card that can do more than just one thing. This is basically a slow disenchant with kind of like a dash of Gavany Township. I think it's awesome, and honestly, paying 4 mana for all these abilities in one spell is just a home run for me, and seems very affordable. Rumbleweed, in my opinion, might be the strongest card in this Precon. It can essentially be a 1 green mana overrun, which is very good in my opinion. Plus, it comes with an 8/8 Vigilance, Reach, and Trample body. 11 mana is a lot to cast by itself, but how many decks do you run that don't end up with a few lands at least in your graveyard? If you're playing Evolving Wilds, fetch lands, and even just ways to discard, this can get reduced very quickly, and if your deck goes wide, catch people by surprise and take a few opponents out with only one spell. Sand Scout is kind of an Oreskos Explorer. I think its power and toughness for its mana value is pretty great, plus the triggered ability seems very powerful as well. We're definitely seeing some very powerful abilities being reined in, get it, with these once a turn limitations. But saving a fetch to get yourself a blocker on someone else's turn, or looting away a land before it gets to your turn, is still great. Vengeful Regrowth is a flashy kind of card that I love to see in precons. It costs a lot, but it does a lot too, and bringing back 3 lands from your graveyard, plus making some decent bodies, seems like a steal for only 6 mana. The flashback cost is also pretty affordable at 8, and assuming you brought back all 3 lands, you can probably very easily recast this again and get even more lands back if your graveyard's full of them. And lastly, we have Yuma. You've likely seen him in the story and how he comes across Kiri and basically adopts him. I've said it before and I'll say it again, but ways to reduce and cheat around the commander tax are strong. When I played Carador, I rarely had to pay more than just the colored pips for him, and I can see how Yuma might easily be the same. His Enter the Battlefield trigger and On Attack trigger also help fuel this by sacrificing a land, plus it helps you replenish your hand by drawing a card. You even get a little bit of Titania mixed in there with his ability, making you a 4/2 Plant Warrior token when a desert goes to the yard. Mind you, this is even better than Titania, since Yuma doesn't care where that land is coming from, it can even be discarded. I think Yuma is going to be a particularly strong commander for any deck that wants to focus on lands, and even better, I love the fact that they've got a full art treatment for it. I love that it helps showcase your commander in a different light, and I really hope that they continue doing this moving forward. Having now seen all the new cards, let's get into some exciting reprints and see what's in store for us as we open up this deck. So starting off, we have creatures. There are 22, not including the new ones or the cards that were being released in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, because, Moxfield doesn't have those up just yet, but we get to look at what we can. Most notably, you'll see that the Precon deck is valued at about $116, and yes, I learned my lesson last time, I didn't pick the most expensive Naya commander, but a lot of that value is actually in this reprint. Green Warden is a great card, and it's $20, so that's kind of cool to see in a Precon deck. Of course, it wouldn't be any kind of commander Precon deck without Avenger of Zendikar and Sun Titan. Wait a second. Avenger's $7? Wow, okay. Yeah. Sun Titan, Perennial Behemoth, Ramunap, Excavator make a lot of sense for a land-based deck. Even Morakul Moldiah, that's like a $10 card, that's pretty sweet. Scoot Swarm, again, another couple bucks. Nesting Dragon, I thought was more expensive than it's showing. I guess it's been reprinted. Oh yeah, in Commander Masters, that makes sense. Titania, again, just like a lot of synergistic, really good creatures that work well with lands. Turn Timber Sower, just some really strong cards. Looking at sorceries, we don't have a ton. There's some interesting stuff like Savine's Reclamation, which will let you bring back lands. Hour of Promise, because we're playing deserts, obviously. Explore lets you play an extra land, draw a card. Escape to the Wilds is something that I see a lot of, and it's kind of growing on me. Descend Upon the Sinful is a board wipe. It exiles all your creatures, which can be, okay. And you get to make a White Angel token. Decimate is decent removal. Thrilling Discovery is a card I play a lot in Modern, but that's because I play Dredge. In this deck, you get to discard 2 lands potentially and draw 3, so that can kind of work well. And Winding Way is kind of a similar thing. You get to look at your top 4, it fills up your graveyard, it's not bad. Instance, we got Harrow, we've got Path to Exile, and we've got Valor's Stance, which is actually surprisingly good. Unholy Heat feels a little bit odd here. I guess Delirium works kind of well because you've got so many cards in your graveyard for milling. Return of the Wildspeaker. Most of the creatures in this deck are non-human, so that makes a lot of sense. As for artifacts, I'm surprised to see Chromatic Lantern here, but I'm happy to. And Perpetual Timepiece is a decent mill card, and it can actually help you get stuff back into your library, which if you lose it, is good. Enchantments, again, you just have some kind of interesting stuff. Martial's Anthem works well because it can pump up your plant tokens and also doubles as kind of reanimator. The Mending of Dominaria helps you fill up your graveyard, and then all of those lands that you milled go back onto the battlefield. And Bitter Reunion, again, it's discarding, so you get triggers from Yuma, you get to get triggers from other things that don't care about how the lands are going into graveyards, just that they are. And it's also a haste enabler, which can help with those tokens. Moving to lands, I don't have much to say. There's a lot of deserts, and a lot of the deserts come into play tapped. There's your typical ones that you've come to expect, the deserts of the scavenger grounds like I mentioned earlier, and also the deserts that come into play untapped and can be tapped for colorless or colored mana, but it costs you a life. Overall, I think the reprints are okay. I think the land base, as with all of them, can be better, but I'm happy to see the Ancient Green Warden, Oracle of Moldiah, Raminap Excavator. Those seem like really on-theme, potentially strong reprints for this deck. So we've seen the new cards, we've seen the reprints. Now, let's look at some cards that I would strongly consider running if I was building Yuma. First up, we want to get rid of lands, and we want to have different ways of doing it, whether it's from our hand, from our library, or from the battlefield. Two of my favorite enchantments are red ones, and that's Molten Vortex and Seismic Assault. Both of these have pros and cons, with Seismic Assault costing a lot more, but being able to discard for free, whereas Molten Vortex costs a red to do it. So the question becomes whether you want it out early and cheap, or whether you want to spend more but not have to cost anything afterwards. And if blasting people in the face isn't your jam, Ayula's Influence is very similar to Seismic Assault, except instead of damage, it makes 2/2 bears. You're also going to want to have ways to sacrifice lands that are on the field, and not just necessarily fetch lands or Evolving Wilds and things like that. One of my personal favorite cards in Commander for that is Elvish Reclaimer. You pay 2 and sacrifice a land, but you get to go tutor for any land you want. It also gets bigger and only costs 1 green mana. It's just a great card to have. Zurin Orb is also fantastic as it costs 0 to cast and 0 to activate, and it nets you life for every land you sacrifice to it. You might also want to consider running Entish Restoration, as basically Yuma and the plant warriors that Yuma make allow for the second part of this spell to go off, finding you 3 basics as opposed to 2. There's also Goblin Trenches, which can help you go wide by sacrificing lands to make Goblin Warrior tokens. And although I've never seen it in action, I really want to find a spot for aggressive mining, and I kinda hope that this is the deck for it. And I think it's an absolute no-brainer that Constant Mists is a strong card to include in this deck, and it allows you to protect yourself through combat with the upside of getting a 4/2 Plant Warrior token. And obviously, since you're dumping so many lands into the graveyard, you're going to want something like Splendid Reclamation, which I'm surprised isn't actually already in the deck. This will bring back all of those wonderful lands that you've either milled, sacrificed, or discarded for the low cost of only 4 mana. They come into play tapped, unfortunately, but that's a small price to play, and you can consider running stuff like Amulet of Vigor or Spelunking if you're really desperate to have them come into play back untapped. And there you have it. As always, thanks to Wizards of the Coast for sending me this free preview, and be sure to let me know in the comments below what your favorite new card from this deck is, and what you plan to add into this deck if you get it. I can't wait to see the secret tech that people include in this deck, and I'm sure there are a bunch of hidden gems that I've missed that could be incredibly powerful with Yuma at the helm, or even Kiri if that's your style. And as always, don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.